The Bible's vivid and graphic descriptions of the war to remove the indigenous nations in the Holy Land are well known. Numerous verses talk about the scorched earth policy of almost total annihilation of those people, such as Deuteronomy 20, verses 16 through 17. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Or Numbers 31, 15 through 18. Have you allowed all the women to live? He asked them. They were the ones who followed Balaam's advice and enticed the Israelites to be unfaithful to the Lord in the Peor incident, so that a plague struck the Lord's people. Now kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. Or 1 Samuel 15, verse 3. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. Notice that the word destroy has a footnote in the NIV translation. This is very important. The note states that the Hebrew term refers to the irrevocable giving over of things or persons to the Lord, often by totally destroying them. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon provides an even more interesting and horrifying explanation of the Hebrew term. It defines the word as to ban, devote, or exterminate. And regarding devotion, it gives the example of dedicating a city to Chemosh, which was a pagan deity. This devotion involved massacring all the inhabitants of the city. Imagine offering all living things in a conquered city to a pagan deity. Jews, Christians, and Muslims would be rightfully horrified. But how different is it from offering all living things to the God of the Bible? John Bergsma and Brant Petrie explain in their book, A Catholic Introduction to the Bible, the Old Testament, that the Hebrew term in question is cherem. They also define it as devoted, and it was used in a liturgical context to describe persons, places, or things that were wholly given over to the use or service of God. In a military context, cherem referred to the dedication of a city as a sacrifice or offering to God. Since everything in the city was consecrated, it could not be taken as booty for the enrichment of the soldiers, but had to be offered to God through dedication, on the analogy of a burnt offering, citing Joshua 6, 17 through 19. Notice that in the military context, the city is a sacrifice or offering to God. This is nothing other than human sacrifice. Every living person and animal is offered to Yahweh, just as they were offered to Chemosh by the pagans. This is despite the fact that elsewhere in the Bible, it clearly speaks against human sacrifice, as in Deuteronomy 12:31. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, because in worshiping their gods, they do all kinds of detestable things the Lord hates. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as sacrifices to their gods. Many Christians argue that the language in the Bible is merely hyperbole, like saying, this suitcase weighs a ton, or he is as fast as the wind, or my favorite team slaughtered the competition. But if that's the case, then we would assume also that when King Mesha of Moab from the 9th century BCE attacked certain Israelite towns and dedicated them to his pagan deity, he was also being hyperbolic. As Bergsma and Petrie state, from a historical perspective, cherem warfare was not unique to ancient Israel. For example, King Mesha of Moab, to the east of the Jordan, attacked certain Israelite towns and dedicated them to his pagan deity. Then Chemosh said to me, Go, take Nebo from Israel. So I went by night and fought against it from the break of dawn until noon, taking it and slaying all, 7,000 men, boys, women, girls, and maidservants, for I had devoted them to destruction for the god Ashtar Chemosh. But as Bergsma and Petrie explain, the hyperbole may be in the total number of people killed and offered to Chemosh. They state that the 7,000 slain probably represented an estimate of the total population of the town before the attack. Although the text describes all as slain, this means none were left alive in the town. The number of fugitives who fled from the battle are not recorded. So the meaning is that when King Mesha said that he devoted the city to Chemosh and killed 7,000 people, he was probably exaggerating the number of people killed. Similarly, when the Bible describes the total annihilation of the indigenous nations, appealing to hyperbole as apologists do, doesn't change the fact, as Bergsman and Petrie state, that according to both Deuteronomy and Joshua, the harem, by its very nature, entailed the death of some non-combatants, such as women and children. Now, of course, there's the need for some nuance here. Just because the Bible says these things happened the way they did, doesn't mean they actually happened that way. The Bible is simply a product of its time, written and edited by people whose identities we do not know for certain. Coming back to the violent wars of Yahweh, when we read Deuteronomy 2:34, at that time we took all his towns and completely destroyed them, men, women, and children. We left no survivors. Or Joshua 6:21, they devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Or 1 Samuel 15 verse 3, they describe the violent extermination of entire cities, including women and children. To the authors, these were not mere hyperbolic descriptions, but meant that non-combatants were killed and offered as sacrifices to Yahweh. Children were brutally killed as offerings to Yahweh. Let that sink in. Comparing the Mesha inscription to biblical language, author Tom Stark states in his book The Human Faces of God, a biblical parallel to the sort of thing we see in the Mesha inscription can be seen in Numbers 21. Here, Israel is facing a Canaanite enemy, the king of Arad and his armies. Israel collectively makes a vow to Yahweh, if you will indeed give this people into my hands, then I will devote their cities to destruction. Then Yahweh listened to the voice of Israel and handed over the Canaanites. Here again, the sacrificial nature of the harem is clear. Yahweh promises victory to the Israelites against Arad's forces, and in exchange, Israel promises Yahweh the sacrificial offering of the city's inhabitants, non-combatants. The sacrifice entailed the forfeiture of virgin wives and potential slaves out of gratitude for the victory. This is shocking. Imagine if the Mesha inscription said this, then Moab made this vow to Chemosh, if you will deliver these people into our hands, we will totally destroy their cities. Chemosh listened to Moab's plea and gave the Israelites over to them. They completely destroyed them and their towns, so the place was called Hormah. In case you didn't notice, this is Numbers 21, except the roles have been switched. Now the Israelites are the victims of a marauding attacker who is making a plea, a deal with his deity to hand over his enemies to them. And in exchange, he will give his enemies as a sacrifice to his God.